Thank you for being here. We would like to introduce this webinar. It's organized by the Regional Studies Association network called Knowledge, Innovation and Regional Development in South America. And this webinar is an introduction also of a more complete workshop that will be held next week. Here we will share the link to you to register for the workshop. And our speaker is one of the coordinators of the network, that is Pablo Galaso. He is an associated professor at the Institute of Economics and the Universidad de la República in Uruguay. And he coordinates the research group on development studies. His research interests focus on territorial development, innovation, and social network analysis. So before leaving the floor to Pablo, I would like to remind that the webinar is 30 minutes. So we'll leave 15 minutes to Pablo to present, and then we collect questions in the Q&A box. So feel free to leave your question there and enjoy the webinar. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And hello, everybody. And thanks to the Regional Studies Association for giving us the opportunity to present this webinar. Let me start with sharing my presentation. Okay, in this webinar we will briefly introduce how can we use patent data from the United States Patent and Trademark Office to study collaboration networks, particularly from a perspective of regional development, and with a focus on developing countries, such as the case of Latin American countries. I will start with this example of a patent, relatively recent patent, and in particular, this is just the front page of the Apple's AirPods patent. This can illustrate us what type of information we can find in a patent. For example, we can see that we have here in the top left part of the screen, we can see the title of the invention, and also the name of the applicant, the institution or person who applies for this patent. We can also see the name of the inventors, the name of the assignee, which is the owner of the patent, the number of the patent, the dates, and so on. So with all this information, we will briefly introduce in this webinar how can we use this information to analyze collaboration networks, and to analyze them in a territorial perspective, and in particular why this information is useful to study innovation processes at a territorial level in developing regions, such as, for example, as I said, Latin America. So let me start briefly presenting. Maybe some of you are familiar with what is a patent, but some of you maybe not. So let me explain briefly. A patent is a legal protection tool that provides the holder of the patent with the right to exclude other actors from making, using, selling, or importing the invention. And this legal protection is guaranteed for a limited period. To obtain a patent, the applicant must detail a lot of technical aspects of the invention. They must explain the novelty and the inventive step. And then the patent office examines this application and determines whether it meets certain criteria. For example, whether it is new, it is not non-obvious, whether this invention has industrial applicability, and so on. So if they approve, if the patent office approves, then the patent is granted and the assignee becomes the rights holder. What kind of information can be found in patents? As we presented before, we can have basically two types of information, or we can organize the information in two groups. First group is the explanation of the technology, and there is a I haven't presented this in the image I started my presentation with. There is a detailed explanation of technical aspects, the purpose, the features, and the operations of the invention. And then there is another group of information which is also called the metadata, which is present in the cover page, and presents details such as the number, the name of the applicant, the inventors, and so on. This is basically the information we are going to use to analyze collaboration networks, okay? And I will explain how. But before, let me explain why this type of information is useful for research. So, a very brief summary of pros and cons of using patent data for research. In the pros side, we can find that patent data present detailed information regarding the technology, the industry, the sector, the actors who are involved, the names of the inventors, the companies that are involved, the geographic location of those actors. This detailed information is also accessible and extensive because it's present for multiple countries and periods of time. The third pros is that patents give insight into technological and economic impact because they can show how the technological change is moving towards in the future in time, and they can allow to study or at least approximate the possible economic impacts of these technological changes. And the last idea I wanted to share to emphasize in the advantages of patent data is that they allow the study of relations, of interactions. They allow to examine how, for example, actors collaborate, how can be influenced by other actors, how can knowledge flow from some organizations to others, or even how can actors compete and present some conflicts. Regarding the downsides of patents, we can highlight that patents present partial information because they only capture a limited portion of innovation process. This is particularly relevant in developing regions because most of innovations are not patented. And also some inventions remain unused. Some patents remain unused. Other actors also employ the different methods of protection, such as trade secrets, and so on. Another aspect that is important to take into account is that there are important variations in patent propensity regarding countries or sectors. For example, patent propensity varies a lot depending on the size of the firm or the industry or the as I said, institutional differences between territories. And finally, regarding the classification of patents that may lead us to analyze sectorial analysis or to develop the sectorial studies, this is not so evident. There are important difficulties in the classification of patents. So based on those pros and cons, we can see that in general terms, to analyze, to develop regional studies or to develop research with a territorial perspective, patents are very interesting because they can measure different dimensions of innovation using sectorial, technological, or even territorial boundaries, different types of boundaries. They allow to incorporate how different actors are involved. For example, they allow us to observe how organizations or individuals, how public actors versus private firms, how active are, for example, productive actors versus academic or research institutions, national actors versus foreign actors in a given territory. And this is interesting for developing regional studies. And finally, they enable an empirical approach to the interactive nature of innovation. The interactive nature of innovation is crucial in analyzing knowledge creation and diffusion processes. And patent data allow for this because they allow distinguishing different types of relationships among actors, for how different technologies are related one to other, and also how different territories are interconnected. In particular, for us, it's particularly interesting patent data because they allow distinguishing different territorial dimensions of collaboration. Collaboration between actors that are located in the same city, actors that are located in different cities but in the same country at a national level, or even collaboration between actors that are located in different countries at a global level. So, in particular, using data from the USPTO is interesting. Why? Because USPTO data have a large coverage and volume. The data is high quality, is very accessible, and presents detailed information. And they have a strong research infrastructure, such as, for example, we will work on the next week workshop. PatentsView, the PatentsView tool is a very useful tool to download a large amount of information, which is of high quality and easy to work with it. USPTO data avoid also language barriers that are that we have find if we use different other countries' data, and also in particular when analyzing different countries, if you want to compare the evolution of inventive activities in different countries, considering data from the USPTO. Is interesting because the US is still a major global center for innovation. So inventors or innovators that are interested in developing an innovation, they will consider the US as a possibility to register their inventions. In particular, as I will briefly explain a bit more, for analyzing innovation in different countries, particularly in peripheral regions, the fact that the US is the global innovation hub facilitates to use this data for comparative studies in different countries. So, for example, using a common intellectual property regime allows avoiding issues associated with institutional differences that presents use when you want to analyze the invention in countries that have different patent offices. So in regions like Latin America, where there is no or hardly very few data at regional level, data that allows for comparative studies between different countries, this type of sources are particularly interesting. And let me finish with some examples of types of networks that are that can be elaborated and analyzed using patent data. Just a general classification of the types of networks that we can elaborate have this general classification of network considering inventors. So it's a kind of interpersonal network where the nodes are inventors and the links are collaboration between them in co-patents. We can also consider networks where the actors are not persons but organizations or firms, like for example assignee networks. And we can also aggregate these actors at a geographical level, considering, for example, cities as nodes and connections between cities, like, for example, collaboration between inventors that are located in different cities. So we can create intercity networks or interregion networks. Finally, it is also interesting to analyze technology networks. For example, networks that are made of technologies, which are the nodes of the networks, and the connections between technologies can be considered with, for example, the co-occurrence of different technologies in the same patents, or movement of inventors that are patenting in one technology and then they patent in a different technology. We can infer that there is a connection between these two technologies. And this allows to understand how knowledge is related in different territories. Just to illustrate some examples of this, those are this is a study in metropolitan statistical areas in the United States, analyzing co-inventor networks. And the researchers, what they do is that they analyze the structure of the collaboration networks in different territories, and they observe how these structures allow for the diffusion of knowledge and then can enhance or positively influence innovation processes in different territories. This is another study where the networks are, instead of being interpersonal networks, those are interorganizational networks in different regions of Germany. And what they present, among other aspects, is how public research organizations play a crucial role in the networks. They are very central actors. They are very actors very active in connecting local nodes with external actors. Another interesting study, also with co-invention networks, but here at the national level in Brazil, using data from Brazil, Brazil patents. These researchers, what they do is they analyze intra-regional collaboration networks and inter-regional collaboration networks in Brazil. And they observe how they interact, these local and national level connections in order to influence innovation process. And I will finish my presentations with some examples of our research lines using USPTO data in Latin America. Here, what we have done is, as I explained before, if we wanted to, we were interested in analyzing in a comparative way the collaboration networks in different countries of the region. So we need to use a common IPR database, and for this, the USPTO data are exceptional. So we consider these the national collaboration networks in different countries. I present, for example, Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela, and Cuba, and we observe the structural properties, considering particularly the extent to which the local actors are connected among them, and the extent to which the local actors are connected to these black nodes that are external actors, that is non-Brazilian, non-Mexican, non-Venezuelan, and non-Cuban actors that collaborate with national actors. In a different study, what we do is that we instead of doing interpersonal networks, we elaborate intercity networks, and we observe how cities in Latin America that are presented here in blue interact between them, among them. They are connected, creating a regional network, and this network is also connected to different territories in the world. And we observe that cities that connect, that are central in this network, are cities that are more inventive. But what we find that is interesting is that broker cities, that is cities that are connected to another Latin American city and to a city located in a different region of the world, those broker cities have some trade-offs, because they have to pay the cost of interpreting different sources of knowledge, which can be beneficial, but it's also costly for the city, and therefore we observe that this gatekeeper role, this broker of connecting the region with other parts of the world, can be costly in terms of innovation processes. And in the last paper, I will show you, well, I'll briefly present you. What we find is that we were interested in analyzing how this brokerage of cities in the intercity network can be associated with knowledge complexity in the city. So the extent to which cities that are occupying a broker role can determine the complexity levels. And we find that an interesting finding that we have here is that brokers influence not only the knowledge level of the city, but also the knowledge complexity levels of the city that connect to them. So they generate a sort of positive externality in the intercity networks, allowing for other cities to benefit from them being brokers. That's basically the general idea of this research work. And this research line is based on or focused on innovation process at the city level in Latin America. So as explained before, this is to conclude my presentation with research focus on cities that are present in different institutional frameworks, different economic frameworks, and so on, but they share the same data from the unique source, which is the USPTO. Okay, thanks very much for your attention, and I'm open to hear and answer questions.
Well, thank you, Pablo, for the presentation. In the meantime, we are going to share the link to register for the workshop that you can also practice with the data live next week. And first, we have a question from David Velasquez. Thank you, David, for your question. And he asked if, did you compare another IP sources like trademarks or scientific publication for Latin America as a complementary source of patent?
Thank you, David. Not yet. We are working on a research project with papers from Scopus database, and we want to analyze and compare the collaboration networks of patent data with papers. And trademarks is also very interesting to consider, but we have not started working with them yet. But for sure, it's definitely relevant to consider them. I've read a paper from Carolina Castaldi explaining how scientific papers, patents, and trademarks reflect kind of an evolution of innovation process, with first the general idea or the scientific well, the more purely research ideas emerges, and then with a practical use in markets is reflected in patent data. And finally, the third stage will be the registration of a trademark. So finally, it's relevant to consider them. Thank you, David.
Right. We have another question from Eren. Sorry if I pronounce wrong the surname. Gilding, that how do you find and measure knowledge complexity?
We use the we use the technology code of the patent, and we use an indicator considering the ubiquity and the level of concentration of this technology in the territory. So I think it's the relatedness indicator that we calculate in this paper.
Great. If there is time, I also have some. First, when I saw your map, I saw some difference in terms of colors. That does reflect the difference between inventors and assignees, or did you find a pattern between the difference? I don't know where the inventor is located and the patent and the owner of the patent, if there is any particularity for Latin American regions. And the other one, if there is no more question from the participants, if you see some studies that relate this innovation with other issues that are unfortunately super relevant for our region, like gender differences or inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Regarding the first question, what to locate the patent, we consider the address of the inventor, and with this we locate the owner of the patent as a firm or research organization. In particular, we distinguish the color in the map was distinguishing Latin American cities from cities in other territories in the world. And this allows us to geolocate the patents because we have the address. We use the inventor address to locate the owner because some owners tend to have, even if some firms, for example, may have different locations in a country, and normally when they use they use the headquarter address, so this over concentrates in large cities. But sometimes the invention is carried out from a different city, a city where the company is present but it's not the headquarter. So this is better captured using the inventor location. I don't know if your question was and regarding the other line of research you were mentioning, we are only focusing on, well, we are focusing particularly on, we are interested in on considering how interactive processes are carried on at the territorial level, how territories interact among them, and so on. Other lines of research that are adjacent to this or can be related to this are also really relevant, in particular, sorry, in particular gender studies using patent data. As long as I know, there are tools to identify the gender of the inventor. Sorry. And this is not a line of research we are following, particularly because our data is not particularly good with this. There are a lot of missing data for this. So, but we are aware that our researchers interested on that, and as long as I know, there are also algorithms to identify or at least explore the gender of actors and see the extent to which or present research questions on these topics.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't know if there are more questions in the Q&A. If no, so, well, I would like to thank you, Pablo, for the presentation. Invite all the participants to join the workshop next week, and also to join the research network. There are many activities going on. So with this, we close this webinar. Thank you, Regional Studies Association, for this opportunity, and see you in the next webinar.
Thank you very much.